Greetings, this is Mr. Nobody, MAGA Republican. Now, I'm going to continue with my list of these known um, cheats at the vote. But before I do that, I want to kind of explain why I'm drilling into this, because it can be a little bit long and tedious. But all of these are important because it is quite a list. But it's a list of all these things, every one of which is serious. And even if you could allow that maybe 2 or 3 might turn out to, be mistaken or have innocent explanations or turn out to be things that were subsequently cleaned up and so forth without anybody telling anybody, by the way. So I don't know about the odds of that. But at any rate, and so forth, the fact of the matter is a lot of these things happened. None of them were ever officially investigated. None of them were ever properly responded to and detailed. They just disappeared. They got swept under the rug. They just disappeared, and you'd hear about it, and then the story's gone, and the account just disappears. It was never refuted, never retracted, just silently disappears. And then they say, "Oh, elections? What election fraud? There wasn't any. There's no evidence. There's tons of it." But let's continue. I'm going to continue. So this is very important. And the thing is, it is so important because it is important to understand what the concerns were and what needed to happen, what should have happened, what could have happened, what could have saved this country. It's already several years of agony, or at least a couple of years now of agony, under basically hostile leadership. And that's the only way to describe it. Hostile leadership. So these things are therefore important to that goal, and so that we can better understand, what Mr. Trump wanted to accomplish, what he wanted to do, and he had a very specific hope, and that hope had to do with Congress going through with what they're supposed to be doing, and not being interrupted. So I will just continue this list. I think I'll just go through it fairly, just item by item. We'll just see. Item number 11. Double voters have been found. They actually identified a number of people who voted in more than one precinct and or even more than one state. I don't have a number on that. Number 12. 15,000 in Nevada also voted in other states. I mean, that's an example of the previous. Okay. 13. Unfolded mail-in ballots observed in Georgia and maybe other places. Mail-in ballots are folded to be mailed out and then to be returned. You have to fold them. Unfolded is a big flat, you have to fold them like you fold a letter, right? And yet here's supposedly a mail-in ballot, and you look at the paper, and obviously it has never been folded. Well, where the hell did this come from? It didn't come from a voter who got it mailed to him, filled it out, folded it, and mailed it back in. It did not come from that. So it has no business being counted. But there was a bunch of those found. All right. 14. Mail-in ballots sent to very many who did not ask for them. In California, everybody got them. There was no way not to get one. Before, I can remember even just previous years, you had to ask for an absentee ballot. You ask for it and they'll send it. That was easy, but you still had to ask for it. Wisconsin still had that policy, at least officially. I think they mostly followed it, but I think there were some people who got them, hadn't asked for them, and in a lot of other places, this became very wide. All right, Pennsylvania, backdated ballots. They identified 15,000 that were backdated the day after they were, sent. From the day, okay. 35,000, backdated from the same day. 23,000 the day before sent. So these were positively identified ballots, okay. But they didn't pull them out or refuse to count them, I'm sure of that. Michigan, ballots counted multiple times. You'll see more of that. Perform perfect black bubbles, as if printed there. 500 plus in a row, all for Biden. If usually you'd have little ovals, fill this over for one guy, fill this over for the other, or for yes or no on a proposition, etc., etc. You know, you got a pen. It makes a little tiny dot, and you got to kind of do a lot of scribbling to fill that dot. It looks uneven. Sometimes the pen wanders slightly outside here and there. Sometimes there's, you know, there's little streaks where you didn't quite run ink over every, you know, bit of the space in there. I mean, that's what it looks like. But you find where 500, where it's neat, clean, perfect. It looks like the sample. So you fill it in like this, and there's a little picture of a solid oval, you know, and it looks like that, exactly like that. In other words, it was printed there with the ballot. And they found 500 in a row, all with Biden bubbles filled in. Now, there isn't a precinct in the world that would have so many ballots all for Biden. Not even the deepest blue precinct in all of the country. Nowhere. You know, you could find a few places where it might be 85, maybe 90 something percent. But even if it was 98% out of 500, you're still going to see a tiny sprinkling of Trumps. Not here. This pile is all Biden. They were printed on a Xerox machine. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, let's see here. 18. Detroit. Workers on election day voting were directed not to verify or identify the identity of voters. So even when they came in, you didn't have to show an ID. You just say who you are, and you know, as long as you have the good luck not to hit a name that somebody had come in, they just let you write your name. They have nothing to compare your signature against. They don't care. They're never gonna look at it, and you could go from site to site. Just do this over and over again. All right. No, we get another one. Zuckerberg donated, you know, massively to control the election. I don't know. That is so wildly partisan. He put the drop boxes in all the most, you know, Democrat-rich areas that you could find. Okay, number 20. Money for votes were offered to gift cards, anywhere from $25 to $500 upon each and other sway to the Indians in their reservations in Nevada, Washoe County. Cash for raffle noted also in Wisconsin, Arizona, Washington, Idaho, Texas, Ohio. So even in other states that couldn't have been affected one way or the other by this, they were actually bribing our American Indians to vote. And guess who they're bribing in the vote? It wasn't Trump, I guarantee you that. See, that's another kind of fraud. Kind of thing you don't usually hear about. Continuing on. All right, anywhere from 130,000 to 288,000 filled out ballots, already filled out. When, where, how, by whom? Transported across state lines from New York to Lancaster, Pennsylvania by driver Jesse Morgan. And then the truck full of all these ballots disappeared. Obviously somebody else took it and drove it somewhere else. To some center where they would have these mules come from. So some of these relate to another thing that gets discovered later. Trump didn't know about it yet. Nobody knew about it yet. But later on we learned about the mules. Okay. Number 22. Now we start getting into some legal things going on here. Texas sued Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin for illegally changing election rules on the fly and without state legislature approval. Now, this is a big ticket item, and this is one that is impossible to conceal, unlike most of these others that have been made to disappear. That lawsuit existed. The Supreme Court sadly kicked it out. I don't know what lame excuse they had, but it scarcely matters. You know, you want to claim lack of standing? I'm sorry, we do have standing because all of us American citizens, including those of Texas, were affected and in a bad way. And you just look at what's going on the border because Trump didn't get to continue his presidency. Okay, Texas very much had a dog in the fight. They had standing. Okay, but at any rate, be all that as it may, that had gotten thrown out. And what was this over? Well, now this gets to something else. It's in the Constitution. The state legislature determines for each state how that state is going to handle and process. It sets up the time, the hours, the places, defines the precincts. All of that stuff is done by the states. And the state legislatures alone have that authority. And yet we find that's overruled by governors, by judges, by just random individuals who just decide to move the goalpost mid-game. Also that their guy could win. You know, you're in a football game and your team is losing, but guess what? You're in cahoots with the refs, and you can change the rules of the game halfway through so that now your losing team will win. You know, they did that. Now, that is open, wide cheating, and it's a cheating that at least one of the, unlike most of these others, is still easy to document because that happened. The biggest example, of course, being Pennsylvania's 3-day extension to get to put your ballots in. I mean, the Pennsylvania legislature never agreed to that in any way, even indirectly. It was just done, and there was nothing they could do about it. But they never consented to it. They never agreed to that. It just happened despite them. You see? And while there was a time where it's like, well, we'll segregate those for a while. But you know what ended up happening? They just got thrown, the segregated ballots just got all thrown in with the rest. And Pennsylvania, which at the close of the polls on election day, Pennsylvania, Trump had won by several 100,000 votes. And then a whole bunch of ballots, maybe anywhere from 130,000 to 288,000, just magically show up, all for Biden, you know, and of course all within those 3 days extension. You know, they had to do a lot of fake votes to move Pennsylvania from the Trump column to the Biden column. All of that, several 100,000 bogus ballots, to say nothing of the dead people, the cured ballots, various other things that we've cited here, just to get Pennsylvania a mere 88,000 and something change votes over Trump. If they hadn't done that, Biden would clearly have been several 100,000 votes behind. Well, he was several hundred thousand votes behind, but he wasn't several 100,000 ballots behind. So, so that's a big one right there. That's a whole category. And we'll hear more about that later. All right, Georgia securities. Oh my God, this was the big kicker. This was just unbelievable. Because you'd see these midnight drops. The counting is supposedly done. Trump has won the state. And then all of a sudden, there'd be a ballot drop in the middle of the night. No poll watchers, no reporters. Everybody had gone home for the night, supposedly. And then suddenly there's this massive drop. And guess what? The ballots are all Biden, or either all or virtually all. And virtually would just be a matter of maybe somebody threw in one or two Trump ballots, just kind of salted in there to keep the machine from saying, wait a minute, or something. That'd probably be about it. So, massively. But they all thought they could get away with this. But in one place, a truly fascinating thing happened. And maybe some people might remember this, because seeing is believing, and I'll get back to that later on. We see they had security cameras in the area. And unlike the poll watchers and reporters and other observers who still had to be, anywhere from 30 to 50 feet away, 30 to 60 feet away, from different, it was a big room. The nearest were maybe about 30 feet away, the furthest at least 60 feet, and maybe even some around a corner. I'm not sure. It was a big distance there, you see. And they were way off in this one end of the room, you see. And even there, even from that distance, you see the lady coming along, standing there. According to the affidavit one of them had written, the lady came out to announce that there's a water leak in the building. We don't want things to get flooded. We're going to have to shut down counting for right now. Go home. It's done. Hopefully we can resume this tomorrow. And it said, come back at nobody up the clock. And so that they packed up their gear, they gathered their stuff, and they all tootled on out. And all that while the people inside, while some of the workers obviously seemed to go home, but at least 4 that were sitting there, plus at least another couple that were in an office or just off screen, but were also involved, just kind of sat there, twiddled their thumbs, twirled on their chairs, and did nothing at all, as if they were on a break, not even drinking coffee or something, or smoking a cigarette, just sitting there, just waiting. And what were they waiting for? Well, what they were waiting for was for all those people who were leaving to get completely all the way out of the building. The guard closes the door, and now it's too late for any of those people to say, oh, wait a minute, I forgot my purse. Can I go back in and get it? I forgot my glasses. It's too late. You're out of the building. Come back tomorrow. Once they're out of the building, then they spring into action. No one's watching, see? I mean, they're like people looking over their shoulders because they want to, before they do something, they know they don't want to get caught at. Just the body language says it all. Then they go to this table. The table was set up at the beginning of the day and just sat there, mostly just walked around, mostly just ignored. On a couple rare occasions, something might be rested on top of it for a moment, and then it would be picked up again and moved on somewhere else. But that's less than 5 minutes of the whole day. The rest of the time, it just sat there, kind of not exactly in the middle, but in the middle-ish of the view of a certain camera, and just sat there undisturbed, almost totally ignored, other than just to be walked around and rather than through, of course. And there it was. Now suddenly they reach under the thing, they pull this stuff out. A bunch of, they call them suitcases, but whatever kind of package they really were. The key thing was, they had 4 counting machines, and these piles of these ballots were allocated to each one. And there were about 10,000 of these things. Ballots that had no chain of custody. Ballots that had no downvote votes on anything. No issues, no mayors, no governors, no, anybody else. Just Biden bubble, nothing else. Ballots with the Biden bubble perfectly and flawlessly filled in every single case, I am sure. Ballots that clearly did not come from actual flesh and blood, legally registered living voters of Georgia, voting their one and only ballot. These had nothing to do with that. They were probably the supposedly mail-in ballots that had never been folded. But at any rate, whatever kind of ballots they supposedly were, they were sent in, they were just divvied out among 4 machines and electronically counted. Later, after that video had already been known for about a week or 2, people watching it more closely observed something else. These ballots, these piles of ballots that were sent to each of the 4 machines by the 4 people who saw most of the time in there, were actually counted through the machines 3 times. So instead of 10,000 bogus votes for Biden, which wouldn't have been enough, you now have 30,000 bogus votes for Biden, which is enough to have moved the state of Georgia from the Trump column to the Biden column. And the thing about it is, we caught them red-handed. They were caught red-handed doing fraud, and we saw it. We saw it. And for us to have seen that and just say, oh, well, so what? All's fair in love, war, and elections, and after all, a successful cheat's as good as a legitimate win. What do we care that Biden didn't really win Georgia, didn't really win Pennsylvania, and probably didn't win these other states as well? What do we care? He's got it. He's it. We're going to go with that. And now are we ever screwed? So that's so huge. That is so huge. And how they can't explain that one. They can say, oh, well, these are just other. No, they weren't. First of all, why did they wait until everybody was gone? Why did they do that when they thought nobody was watching? You know? So no matter how you look at it. Oh, there's a follow-up on that. That later on, after all of this stuff, and after the January 6th and everything else, you're supposed to store all the ballots, ballot materials, and so forth, and registrations, and all of these voting artifacts are supposed to be stored for 22 months after the election so that they can be at any time reviewed, questioned, challenged, examined, whatever else in case there's a dispute or anything else. You can do all that. And they were doing that, except that the vault in which those things were being stored was broken into. Guess which ballots are now missing? Because their biggest fear is what if America gets to see what those ballots that came out from under that table actually look like? You say, it's one thing to believe, to suspect, very strong reason to believe. It's another thing to actually have the physical ballots in front of you and look at it. Here it is. It is a mail-in ballot, but it was never folded. It has the Biden bubble filled in, obviously by print and not by hand. It has nothing else filled in down ballot. It is, and all 10,000 of these are the same, except you can just line them up like this, and you can see where somebody took a ballot from some other pile, with a Trump thing, and stuck one here, and stuck another one here, and stuck another one here, and then tidied it all up and fed it to these 4 machines to count. We could see that. We could catch them red-handed, and we still don't do anything about it. After that, I just kind of say, I would say God in His providence allowed us to see what happened. And there just wasn't enough of America that cared. Nobody in power, nobody with the power to do anything about it cared. After that, I don't know. I just kind of have to think, America doesn't deserve another chance from God. After that, we don't deserve another chance. That's just how that is. Okay. Item 24. All right. Republican electoral voters appointed for and by Pennsylvania. Oh, this was another interesting event. There were, however, separate slates of electors. See, a number of states, having already done a moron count and sent, these are Biden electors, and then they found out there was a lot of this stuff going on, and the state legislatures actually met, talked about these things, and by the way, that also entails a lot of interesting footage where a lot of these people who saw these things were there. It could be questioned, examined, cross-examined, whatever evidence they could present, they presented it. Enough for the state legislatures to realize, we probably sent the wrong slate of electors. So they sent a second slate of electors, who therefore have as much legitimacy and could have equally legitimacy have been selected by Pence. He could have done either one legitimately. So, indeed, I think in at least 1 or 2 cases, the states actually repudiated their first slate of electors and sent the second one. But that repudiation just gets ignored, poof, gone, So, that was another one. Very important. Interestingly enough, even New Mexico, although I'm not sure why New Mexico's on that list, because it really wasn't even close there. All right, number 25. All right, 3,987 votes placed in Nevada by non-citizens. They're not citizens. Are they even legally here? Legal residents, maybe not. Maybe just outright illegals. I don't know, but they weren't citizens, and only citizens are allowed to vote. But they found this many that were placed by individuals. Look it up. This individual is not a citizen. 29. 432,116 Trump votes in Pennsylvania. Uncounted. Now this was weird. You could actually watch the vote totals on some computer display or something, or read out, and a vote here, it was just literally counting downward. How does that happen? You know? I mean, it's one thing if the other guy's counting up, but all that was happening here is that he was just counting down. As if every time they saw a Trump ballot, instead of saying, okay, that's +1, it was like, okay, that's -1. And this went on to the tune of some 437,116 observed, uncounted, decounted, reverse, whatever you want to call it, decrement counted ballots. How does that happen? And let's see here. Well, afterwards there'd be more things discovered, but we didn't know these by January 6th. You know, I mentioned the Zuckerbucks, 2,000 Mules is another one. There's a whole program about that that explains that. The efforts that were involved in trying to the Biden laptop thing, and the actual, when they suppressed it, they didn't just suppress it, which they could have done. They actually inveigled 51 characters to intelligence figures to say, oh, it's Russian crap. Okay. Then there's the Time article. That almost bears a discussion of its own. And what's in the Twitter files. So you see, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of different angles on this thing. There's not only a lot of different tricky things to do to jigger the numbers, and I haven't even included here the suspected stuff that was involved, you know, with the machines themselves. So I'm going to talk about that briefly here too. You see, those Dominion machines have a feature. It's described in their sales pitch. I've seen it. It's described in their user manual. It is a feature by which you can arrange to give weight to the votes. So instead of just every vote for A is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can make it's 0.95, 1.90, 2.85, you see. And you can make another one heavier. So instead, 1, 2, 3, 1.05, 2.1, 3.15, 4.2, and whatever fraction you want. You can give these things different weights. That is a feature. It is a setting, and there's no reason for a thing like that to exist except specifically to perpetrate fraud. And it's just right there. It's in their user manual. It's in their sales pitch. The only thing that's not clear is to what extent it was actually used. Well, one place you could know that it was used was wherever you find fractions of a vote in any count, in any precinct, in any location. If they show a fraction of a vote, somebody used this feature to cause somebody's votes to either be increased or decreased in weight, so as to make it look a little bigger or a little smaller. There are also instances, at least one in Michigan I know of for sure, where somebody somehow about 4,000 votes belonged in one category and should have been in another. Supposedly that was tracked down and restored, however. But if it could happen there may be other places where that we don't know for sure. We wanted some accountability. We never had that. He just said, we need your passwords to get in. And I said, we ain't giving you our passwords. Well, then I guess nobody will ever know what happened. I really have to wonder if either side was really interested in finding out what was going on. I mean, you got Democrats who don't want anything to be counted on the one side, and Republican rhinos, who they don't want Biden, but they're just so against Trump that they're willing to watch America get destroyed by it. So they have to go through the motions, but they don't really want to find anything, even though they officially have to try and look for it. So what do? They insist on a password. They won't get it. All anyone reasonable human being would have needed to do is say, very well, you provide us a person who has the password. They will come to the machine. They will use it. We won't see what they type to get the password in. Once they've logged in, That person is done. We're in. We can now look at everything and see what's going on. That's all they had to do. Now, all of this, as I said, I'm glad I finished going through my list, because the next part is now we're coming up to the day itself. Like I said, all of this is relevant to what happened. It's a big part of why. But how does this why fit in? That's for the next